everyone. Good morning. My name is Aryan Patil. I'm doing my master's in data science here at Rochester Institute of Technology. This is my teammate.
Hi, my name is Arvind Nair, and I'm doing my master's in computer science here at RIT. And today we'll be presenting one of our projects for ISTE 782, which is democracy, press, freedom, and the public trust across countries. So we'll be presenting this topic.
This is a data analysis project where we looked at 128 countries and asked a simple question. Do democratic countries with free press have citizens who trust their institution more? The answer we got was not what we expected. And that's what makes this interesting. Let's get into it. Here's a quick roadmap for what we will cover first. The introduction and the questions where we are trying to answer, then the data, how we analyzed it. After that, three visualization we build, and finally, what we actually find and what it means.
So we'll start with the introduction. There's a plenty of common assumption in political science that if a government is democratic and press is free, people should be more confident in their institution. Uh, the logic is simple. Accountability and transparency should build trust. Uh, we want we went into this project expecting to confirm these ideas. We looked at a total of 128 countries, and for each countries we had measured how democratic they are, how free the press is, and how much the citizen trusts these three things: their government, the news media, and the science. But what the data actually showed us was surprising. Some of the most democratic countries and had lower government trust than we expected, and some countries that are more authoritarian actually showed a higher trust score. So the relationship between the governance and trust is more complicated than what we see in theory. We'll look into this exactly in the next slide. So, in the next slide, we are talking about the data and how we worked on it and how we analyzed it. Our data set had 8 variables for each country. The governance side included economist democracy index and the press freedom index. For an economic context, we had the human development index, the Gini coefficient, which measures the income inequality and the corruption perception index. And then on the trust side we had three separate score: one for the trust in government, one for the trust in news media, and the other for the trust in science. For the actual analysis we use Python. uh, we use the library Pandas, which helped us clean and organize these data. We use Matplotlib and Seaborn to build our charts. We also build an interactive scatter plot in Tableau so we can explore individual countries more easily. To measure how variables relate to each other, we calculated Pearson correlation coefficient, which basically tells us how strong two things move together and whether in the same or in the opposite direction. A value of +1 means that they are perfectly together, moving perfectly together, and -1 means that one goes up and the other one goes down. Just to be clear, this is a correlation study, not casual. We are finding patterns, not proving that one thing causes another thing.
Great. Now let's get into the visualization. This is where the data really speaks. This is our correlation heat map. Every box in the grid shows how two variables relate to each other. The warmer the color, the more positively correlated, meaning both go up together. The cooler or the darker the color, the more negatively correlated, meaning when one goes up, the other tends to go down. Let me walk you through the four numbers that matters the most. First, the democracy and the press freedom, which is a R plus 0.78. That's a strong positive correlation. This makes complete sense. Countries that allow political freedom also tend to allow media freedom. They develop together. Second, this is the surprising one. Democracy and government trust R equals minus 0.40. That's a negative number. So the democratic countries actually have a lower government trust on average. Our interpretation in democracies, citizens are constantly exposed to political debates, criticism, and media coverage of failures. That keeps trust lower. Even when the system is actually working well, in more closed society, people simply have less access to information that would make them uh, distrust their government. Third, media trust and science trust, which has a R equals plus 0.62. Uh, People who trust the media also tend to trust science. This tells us that trust in expert sources, whether it's journalism and or scientists, it's is really one general attitude, not two separate ones. Both Gini index and government trust R was minus 0.43. Countries with higher income inequality tend to have lower trust in government. That's important, and we will come back to it. This is a bar chart. This is a bar chart that shows trust score across five specific countries we selected: Belgium, Chile, Estonia, Singapore, and South Sudan. We picked this because they gave us good range of different governance situations. Singapore. Singapore was the most surprising. It ranks low on press freedom, meaning the government has significant control over the media. But it has highest government trust score in this group, around 67. That goes directly against what the overall trend would predict. Singapore shows that tight information control and high trust can coexist, possibly because citizens have fewer reason to distrust what they know. Next is Estonia. It is almost the opposite. It has strong democracy, it is famous for digital governance, and yet government trust only reaches around 57. The science trust is notably low. One possible reason is that politically engaged citizens in Estonia are more critical. They know enough to question things. South Sudan scores low on almost everything: democracy, press freedom, development. But government trust is relatively high. This is a pattern we see in places where there's limited access to independent information. If you never seen credible criticism of your government, your default is often trust. Belgium and Chile both fall somewhere in middle. Belgium shows fairly balanced spread across all three trust categories. Big takeaway here: no single governance metrics can predict trust level. Every country has its own context.
Now, for the third figure, this was built on Tableau. Each dot is a country. The horizontal axis is the democracy index. The vertical axis is the press freedom index. The size of each bubble represents how much a country's citizen trust in science, and the color depth represents the government trust. The general upward slope confirms what the heat map told us. Higher democracy tends to come with higher press freedom. Estonia and Belgium are up in the top right, and South Sudan is down in the bottom left. But look at Singapore. It breaks the trend. It sits higher on the democracy axis than its press freedom score would suggest, and its bubble are noticeably darker, meaning the higher government trust relative to similar countries on the chart. One thing that was really useful about building this in Tableau is the interactivity. We could click through individual countries during our analysis to see whether regional pattern up held up at the country level rather than just looking at the aggregate trend. The great way to spot outliers that the number alone might not highlight. And so now we'll move on to the key findings and the conclusion of our project. So let's summarize what we have found. The first, democracy and press freedom are tightly linked. Uh, that one held up exactly as expected. Finding two, the democracy paradox. Government trust does not rise with democratic quality. It actually goes down. R is equal to minus 0.40, as we have seen in the heat map. Why? Because in democrat democracy sees people are constantly exposed to debate, criticism, and media coverage of government failures. That this keeps a lower this keeps the trust lower, not because the government is failing, but because the citizens fully have full visibility into its imperfections. In countries with tighter information control, people simply don't have the to uh, same exposure of information so as to find a reason to distrust the government. Now, the finding number three is that consistently expect trust. So media trust and science trust move together. As you can see in the heat map, R is equal to plus 0.62. People's attitude towards expert sources, whether scientific or journalistic, seems to be one general disposition, not two separate ones. This has a real implications for science communications and the media credibility. Finding number four is that inequality matters independently. The Gini coefficient correlation with the government trust at R is equal to minus 0.43. And this holds even after you account for how democratic or press free the country is. So inequality is just a side effect. It has its own separate impacts on whether people trust their government or not.
So to wrap up, we went into project expecting democracy and trust to be fairly aligned. The data told a different story. Press freedom and democratic quality are highly tightly connected, but being democratic does not guarantee that citizens will trust their government more. In fact, in this dataset, the more democratic a country is, the lower its government trust tends to be. That has real implication for policy. If you can't fix a trust deficit just by making governance more democratic, then policymakers need to think separately about reducing economic inequality, improving media quality, and investing in civic education. Our analysis covered board patterns across 128 countries, and the country level variation we saw in the bar chart and the scatter plot makes clear that you need more context specific research to explain what drives trust in particular settings. That's our project. Thank you for listening and have a good day.